The evening sky painted Houston's busy streets in shades of purple and orange as Special Agent Maya Thompson guided her silver Honda Civic through traffic. She'd just wrapped up a successful 6-month operation, taking down a major drug trafficking ring that had been poisoning local communities. The satisfaction of seeing justice served still brought a smile to her face, even after 15 years with the FBI. Her thoughts drifted to the simple pleasures awaiting her at home: a hot shower, her favorite takeout from the family-owned Thai restaurant around the corner, and maybe catching up on that new crime documentary everyone at work couldn't stop talking about. The radio hummed softly in the background, playing old-school R&B that reminded her of Sunday afternoons at her grandmother's house. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror snapped her out of these peaceful thoughts. Maya checked her speedometer. She'd been going exactly 5 miles under the limit, a habit ingrained from years of law enforcement training. Her turn signals were working, and her registration was up to date. Still, she knew the drill better than most. Following the protocol she'd practiced countless times in her career, Maya smoothly pulled over to the right shoulder of the road, positioning her car at a slight angle so any passing traffic would give them space. She turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2 o'clock, and switched on the interior light, even though dusk hadn't fully settled in. Through her side mirror, Maya watched the police officer emerge from his patrol car. Something about his approach made her training kick in. His hand was already resting on his holster. His steps were rushed, aggressive. In her years of service, she'd learned to read body language like a book, and everything about this officer's posture sent warning signals through her mind. Maya took a deep breath, reminding herself that she'd been on both sides of the situation. As an FBI agent, she'd conducted countless stops herself, and as a black woman driving in America, she'd been pulled over more times than she cared to remember. Her FBI credentials rested in the center console, easily accessible but out of sight. Her badge hung around her neck, tucked beneath her blazer. The sun had nearly disappeared now, casting long shadows across the street. A few curious onlookers had slowed their pace on the sidewalk, some already pulling out their phones. Maya noticed all of this in her peripheral vision, her training automatically cataloging every detail of her surroundings. As footsteps approached her window, Maya kept her breathing steady and her movements deliberate. She'd handled hostage situations, coordinated with international law enforcement, and taken down some of the most dangerous criminals in Texas. This should have been a routine traffic stop, a simple misunderstanding at worst. But as the officer's flashlight beam cut through her window, Maya's instincts told her this encounter was about to become anything but routine. The atmosphere crackled with tension, like the air before a storm. In that moment, she didn't know that this traffic stop would soon spark a national conversation and change lives far beyond this quiet street corner in Houston. Her FBI training had prepared her for countless scenarios, but what was about to unfold would test not just her professional skills, but her humanity in ways she never expected. As she waited for the officer to approach, Maya Thompson was about to face a situation that would challenge everything she believed about justice, forgiveness, and the power of choosing understanding over anger. The beam of Officer Barrett's flashlight swept across Maya's face, harsh and bright against the growing darkness. She squinted slightly but maintained her professional composure, hands steady on the steering wheel where they belonged. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting odd shadows across the gathering scene. "License and registration," the officer barked, his tone sharp enough to cut through glass. Maya noticed his nameplate caught the gleam of her interior light. Officer J. Barrett. His body language remained tense, aggressive, like a coiled spring ready to release. "Good evening, officer," Maya responded, her voice carrying the calm authority developed through years of federal service. "I'm going to reach for my credentials now. I'm an FBI special agent." She kept her movements slow and deliberate, exactly as she'd trained countless junior agents to do. But before her hand could reach the center console, Officer Barrett's reaction changed everything. "Yeah, right," he scoffed, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Step out of the vehicle now." His command echoed down the quiet street, drawing more attention from passers-by. Maya's mind raced through her options, processing the situation like the trained professional she was. The growing crowd of onlookers had their phones out now, their screens glowing like fireflies in the twilight. She could hear fragments of their whispered conversations, could feel the tension building in the air like static before a lightning strike. "Sir," she tried again, maintaining her composure, "I'm reaching for my FBI credentials. They're in my center console. I'm happy to show you," I said out of the car. Officer Barrett's voice rose sharply, his hand now fully gripping his holster. "Hands where I can see them." The absurdity of the situation might have been almost funny if it weren't so dangerous. Here she was, a 15-year veteran of the FBI, being treated like a common criminal. The very badge that should have diffused this situation was sitting just inches away, but Officer Barrett's prejudice had blinded him to even the possibility of its existence. A cool evening breeze carried the scent of rain as Maya carefully considered her next move. She'd dealt with high-pressure situations before: hostage negotiations, undercover operations, coordinated raids, but this was different. This was personal in a way that none of those had been. Through the window, she could see Barrett's partner approaching from their patrol car, walking with less urgency but still alert. The partner's presence could either escalate or diffuse the situation. Everything hinged on what happened in the next few moments. Maya thought about her team back at the FBI office, about the successful operation they'd just completed. The irony wasn't lost on her. Hours ago, she'd been coordinating with local law enforcement to bring down criminals, and now she was being treated like one by the very system she served. The growing crowd of onlookers had swelled to at least a dozen people now, their phones recording every moment. Some were speaking in hushed, concerned tones. Others were more vocal in their disapproval. Maya knew that whatever happened next would be documented, shared, and scrutinized by thousands. "Last warning," Officer Barrett's voice cut through her thoughts. "Exit the vehicle now, or I will remove you myself." The situation had reached a critical point. Maya could feel years of training and experience warring with the very human instinct to defend her dignity. But she knew that in moments like these, when adrenaline runs high and tensions higher, one wrong move could have devastating consequences. As she prepared to comply with Barrett's order, Maya held on to one thought: sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't immediate resistance, but strategic patience. What happened next would test not just her professional training, but her deepest beliefs about justice, dignity, and the power of choosing wisdom over reaction. Maya took a deep breath and opened her car door with deliberate slowness, her movements precise and controlled. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying the distant sounds of city traffic and the murmurs of the growing crowd. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she stepped out, hands raised slightly at shoulder level, a position she'd never imagined herself in. "Turn around, face the vehicle," Officer Barrett commanded, his voice tight with unnecessary tension. Maya complied, feeling the cool metal of her car against her palms as she placed them on the hood. Her FBI badge hung heavy around her neck, still hidden beneath her blazer, a silent witness to this unfolding scene. The crowd had grown larger now, their phones recording every moment. Someone in the background called out, "She said she's FBI. Just check her badge." But Officer Barrett seemed deaf to everything except his own assumptions. "Spread your legs, hands behind your back," he ordered, and Maya felt the familiar weight of handcuffs closing around her wrists. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Just hours ago, she'd been the one putting cuffs on actual criminals after months of careful investigation. A young woman in the crowd gasped audibly as the cuffs clicked shut. "This isn't right," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She's being so cooperative." Others murmured in agreement, their voices a chorus of concern and disapproval. Maya's blazer had shifted during the handcuffing, revealing the edge of her FBI credentials. Officer Barrett's partner noticed it first, his eyes widening slightly. "Hey Jim," he said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Maybe we should." "I can show you my credentials," Maya interrupted calmly, her voice steady despite the situation. "They're around my neck, and there's additional identification in my center console. I'm Special Agent Maya Thompson, Houston Field Office." The growing crowd had spilled onto the sidewalk, their presence creating an impromptu audience to this display of injustice. Cars slowed as they passed, some drivers pulling over to watch. The scene was being documented from every angle, phones capturing what would soon become viral footage. Thunder rumbled in the distance, nature's own commentary on the tension in the air. A few drops of rain began to fall, but nobody in the crowd moved. They stood witness, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of how quickly a routine traffic stop had transformed into something much more significant. Maya felt a mix of emotions, frustration at the situation, concern for how it might escalate, and a deep sadness at the reality that her badge and years of service meant nothing in the face of prejudice. But beneath it all was a calm certainty that how she handled these next few moments mattered more than the injustice itself. "Listen," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years of federal service, "I understand you doing your job. But right now, you're making a serious mistake. I'm a federal agent, and this situation can either end with a simple verification of my credentials, or it can become something much more complicated." Officer Barrett's partner had moved closer now, his expression showing growing concern. The rain was falling steadily, creating a gentle backdrop to the tense scene. Maya's suit was getting wet, but she remained perfectly still, her dignity intact despite the handcuffs. More patrol cars were arriving now, their lights painting the wet streets in alternating red and blue. Maya could hear radio chatter as dispatchers and other officers began to piece together who she really was. The truth was about to come out, but the damage was already done. In that moment, as she stood handcuffed in the rain, Maya wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about every person who had ever faced similar treatment without the protection of a badge, about every time prejudice had masqueraded as procedure. And she was already forming an idea, one that would transform this moment of injustice into an opportunity for real change. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the steady patter of rain as a police supervisor's vehicle pulled up to the scene. Sergeant Chen stepped out, umbrella in hand, his face set in professional concern as he surveyed the situation. The crowd had grown despite the weather, their phones still recording every moment of the unfolding drama. "What's the situation here?" the sergeant asked, his experienced eyes taking in every detail, the handcuffed woman in professional attire, the growing crowd, and his visibly agitated officer. The rain continued to fall, creating small rivers of blue and red light on the wet pavement from the surrounding police vehicles. "She claims to be FBI," Officer Barrett reported, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. His partner shifted uncomfortably beside him, glancing between Maya and the sergeant. "My credentials are around my neck," Maya stated clearly, raindrops running down her face. "And my FBI badge and ID are in the center console of my vehicle. I've been trying to show them since this began." Sergeant Chen nodded, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. "Let's verify that," he said, moving toward Maya's car. The crowd watched in tense silence as he reached into the center console and retrieved her credentials. The moment he opened the leather wallet, his face changed dramatically. "Remove those cuffs. Now." His voice was quiet but carried unmistakable authority. Officer Barrett's hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the handcuff keys. The watching crowd murmured as Maya was finally released, rubbing her wrists gently. "Special Agent Thompson," the sergeant began, his tone completely transformed, "I cannot begin to express." "First," Maya interrupted smoothly, still maintaining her professional demeanor despite her damp clothes, "I'd like to go to my car and get my phone. I need to call my supervisor at the Houston field office. This incident will require an official report." The crowd parted respectfully as Maya walked back to her vehicle. Some people clapped briefly, others nodded in approval, but Maya kept her focus straight ahead. She'd learned long ago that moments of vindication weren't always moments of victory. Inside her car, she took a moment to collect herself, aware of every eye still watching. Her phone showed several missed calls, news traveled fast in law enforcement circles, and word of an FBI agent being detained would spread even faster. But Maya's mind was already working on something bigger than just filing a complaint. Outside, she could hear Sergeant Chen giving sharp instructions to his officers. Officer Barrett stood rigid, his earlier aggression replaced by the dawning realization of just how seriously he had misjudged the situation. His career, his future, everything he'd worked for hung by a thread, and everyone present knew it. Maya stepped back out into the rain, phone in hand, her FBI badge now clearly visible around her neck. The sight of it seemed to make Officer Barrett shrink further into himself. The crowd had begun to thin as the drama appeared to be ending, but those who remained were still recording, sensing that history was being made on this rain-soaked street corner. "Agent Thompson," Sergeant Chen said, approaching her with clear distress on his face, "we'll need a full statement. And I want you to know that appropriate disciplinary action." Maya held up a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. The rain had lessened to a gentle drizzle, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled one last time, as if nature itself was drawing this scene to a close. She looked at Officer Barrett, really looked at him, seeing past the uniform to the person beneath, someone whose actions tonight would define him unless something changed. "Before we proceed with anything," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the now quiet street, "I have a proposal that might turn this incident into something more constructive than another headline about what's wrong with our system." The sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly, and even Officer Barrett lifted his head, surprise momentarily replacing his shame. The remaining onlookers leaned in, sensing that they were about to witness something unexpected. Maya had spent the entire confrontation planning not just her next move, but what could turn this moment of conflict into an opportunity for real change. The next morning, Maya sat in her home office, staring at her laptop screen where dozens of news articles and social media posts about the incident filled her feed. The videos had gone viral overnight, with millions of views and thousands of comments demanding justice. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn with calls from news stations, civil rights attorneys, and even a few politicians seeking to champion her cause. Sunlight streamed through her window as she sipped her coffee, her cat purring contentedly in her lap, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in the digital world. Her FBI supervisor had already called twice, explaining that the Bureau would fully support whatever action she chose to take. The police department was bracing for a lawsuit, and Officer Barrett had been placed on immediate administrative leave. "You could end his career with a single phone call," her colleague had said during their morning briefing. "Nobody would blame you." The videos make it crystal clear. This was textbook profiling. Maya's inbox was filled with messages from well-meaning friends and fellow agents sharing similar sentiments. Some urged her to press charges, others suggested going to the media. A civil rights organization had already drafted a lawsuit, just waiting for her signature to proceed. The path of retribution lay wide open before her. But as she watched one of the viral videos for the 10th time, she found herself focusing not on Officer Barrett's actions, but on his face in those final moments, the look of someone whose entire world had crumbled in the space of a few minutes. She thought about the young officers in the crowd, watching and learning exactly the wrong lesson about what happens when you make a mistake. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the best way to fight fire isn't with more fire, but with water. Maya had always admired how her grandmother, who'd lived through the civil rights era, maintained her dignity and wisdom even in the face of injustice. "Change," she used to say, "comes not from breaking people down, but from building them up to see differently." Maya opened her email and began typing a letter to the police chief. The cat stretched in her lap as her fingers moved across the keyboard, crafting something very different from the angry demand for justice everyone expected. Instead of calling for Officer Barrett's termination, she proposed an alternative that could transform this incident from a career-ending disgrace into a catalyst for genuine change. Her phone buzzed again. Another news station requesting an interview. The social media storm continued to grow, with hashtags demanding justice and calling for systemic change. Maya understood the anger. She'd felt it herself standing in the rain with handcuffs around her wrists. But she also understood something deeper, that real change rarely comes from moments of punishment, but from moments of transformation. She glanced at her FBI badge sitting on the desk, thinking about what it represented. Not just authority or power, but responsibility. The responsibility to protect and serve everyone, even those who might not initially deserve it. The same responsibility that Officer Barrett had forgotten in those crucial moments during the traffic stop. The sun had climbed higher in the sky as Maya finished her proposal. Her decision would disappoint some who wanted a more dramatic response. The hashtags might call her too soft, too forgiving. But as she read over her words one final time, she knew this was the right choice, not the easiest one, but the one that could create lasting impact. Maya attached her proposal to an email addressed to the police chief, her FBI supervisor, and several other key figures in law enforcement. Her finger hovered over the send button as she considered the path she was choosing. It wasn't the path of vengeance or even justice in the traditional sense. It was something potentially more powerful, a path toward understanding and genuine change. Outside her window, she could hear children playing, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. Their world would be shaped by how today's leaders handled moments like these. Maya took a deep breath and clicked send, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform a moment of injustice into an opportunity for growth that nobody saw coming. 2 weeks after the incident, Maya stood at the podium in the police department's training room, facing rows of officers in uniform. The room was packed, with people even standing along the walls. Officer Barrett sat in the front row, his posture stiff with anxiety. The police chief had been surprised by Maya's request to speak, but he quickly agreed, recognizing the unique opportunity it presented. "I'm not here to shame anyone," Maya began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to share a story, not just about what happened that night, but about what happens every day on our streets." She clicked to her first slide, showing a photo of herself at her FBI Academy graduation, standing proud in her uniform. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Every eye was fixed on Maya as she continued, "Before I was an FBI agent, I was a young black woman learning to drive. My father sat me down and gave me the talk, not about dating or college, but about how to survive a traffic stop." She noticed several officers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded slightly, perhaps thinking of similar conversations they'd had with their own children. The human connection was building, exactly as she'd hoped. "That night 2 weeks ago, I followed every rule my father taught me," Maya continued, clicking through photos of her achievements, awards, and successful operations. "I did everything right. I was professional. I was calm. And still, I ended up in handcuffs." Officer Barrett's face had reddened, but Maya wasn't focusing on his discomfort. Instead, she shared stories from her 15 years in law enforcement, times she'd made split-second decisions, times she'd faced danger, times she'd had to overcome her own prejudices. "We all have biases," she explained, her voice warm with understanding. "The difference is what we do with them. Every traffic stop, every interaction is a chance to either reinforce those biases or challenge them." The tension in the room had shifted from uncomfortable to attentive. Maya could see officers taking notes, others nodding in agreement. Even Officer Barrett had lifted his head, really listening now. She shared body camera footage from her own FBI operations, showing how she handled tense situations with patience and professionalism. "This isn't about being perfect," she emphasized. "It's about being willing to learn and grow." Then she did something unexpected. She asked for volunteers to share their own experiences. Hands went up hesitantly at first, then more confidently. Officers shared stories of mistakes they'd made, lessons they'd learned, times they'd wished they'd handled things differently. "What happened that night wasn't just about me and Officer Barrett," Maya said, approaching the end of her presentation. "It was about a system that needs healing on all sides. We can use this moment to point fingers and assign blame, or we can use it to create real change." She clicked to her final slide, a proposal for a new training program she developed with input from both FBI and local law enforcement. "This is my response to that night," she explained. "Not a lawsuit, not a demand for punishment, but an invitation to do better together." The room was silent for a moment before Officer Barrett stood up. His voice shook slightly as he addressed his fellow officers. "I made a horrible mistake that night," he admitted. "I let my assumptions override my training, but Agent Thompson is showing us a better way forward." Maya watched as other officers nodded in agreement. The police chief stood up as well, announcing that the department would be implementing her training program immediately. But it was the younger officers' faces that gave her the most hope. They were seeing firsthand how to handle mistakes with grace and turn them into opportunities for growth. As the session ended, officers lined up to speak with her. Some shared their own stories, others asked for advice. Officer Barrett waited until last, struggling to find the right words. But Maya didn't need his words. His willingness to learn and change spoke volumes. Outside the training room, the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows in the hallway. Maya knew this was just the beginning. Real change would take time, commitment, and continued effort from everyone involved. But as she watched officers leaving the room, talking animatedly about what they'd learned, she felt certain that her unexpected response to injustice would create ripples far beyond this one department. 6 months after that rainy night, Maya stood at the back of a packed community center, watching Officer Barrett lead a workshop on bias recognition and community policing. The same officer who had once handcuffed her was now teaching other officers how to build trust with the communities they served. The transformation was remarkable. It starts with admitting our own biases, Barrett explained to the room of officers and community members. I learned that lesson the hard way, but thanks to Agent Thompson, I got a chance to turn my mistake into something positive. His voice carried the genuine conviction of someone who had gone through a profound change. The training program Maya had developed had spread beyond Houston, reaching police departments across 3 states. Her inbox regularly filled with messages from officers sharing their experiences and thanking her for showing them a different way to handle difficult situations. But the real change was happening on the streets. Community complaints had dropped by 30% in the districts that had implemented her training. Officers reported feeling more confident in their interactions, and citizens were noticing the difference. The walls of distrust were slowly beginning to crack. Maya walked through the local park where she often took her morning jog, smiling as she passed a police officer chatting with a group of teenagers. 6 months ago, that scene might have been tense, filled with suspicion on both sides. Now there was easy laughter and genuine conversation. Her phone buzzed with a text from her FBI supervisor. Another department had requested her training program. The video of her confrontation with Officer Barrett had gone viral for all the wrong reasons, but her response had gone viral for all the right ones. National news outlets had picked up the story, not for the incident itself, but for what happened afterward. At her office in the FBI building, Maya reviewed the latest feedback from her training sessions. Officers shared stories of moments where they'd caught themselves making assumptions and chosen a different approach. Community members wrote about positive interactions that had changed their perspectives on law enforcement. "Your grandmother would be proud," her mother had said during their Sunday dinner last week. Maya thought about how her grandmother had always insisted that real change comes from wisdom, not anger. Looking at the results of the past 6 months, those words rang truer than ever. Officer Barrett had become an unexpected ally in this mission, his honest sharing of his own journey, from that night of poor judgment to his current role as an advocate for change, added powerful credibility to the training program. Other officers related to his story, seeing in him the possibility of growth and redemption. The police chief had recently shared some surprising statistics. Use of force incidents were down, community cooperation had increased, and officer job satisfaction had improved. When officers feel confident in their ability to handle situations without bias, he'd explained, everyone benefits. Maya's approach had created a ripple effect beyond law enforcement. Local schools had invited her to speak about conflict resolution and the power of choosing education over retaliation. Business leaders sought her advice on handling workplace bias. Her story had become a case study in turning confrontation into conversation. One afternoon, while getting coffee at her favorite local shop, Maya overheard 2 young officers discussing a traffic stop they'd handled the previous night. "I remembered Agent Thompson's training," one said. "Instead of assuming the worst, I took a breath and approached with an open mind. Turned out the driver was just lost and scared." These small victories, these everyday moments of changed behavior, meant more to Maya than any official recognition. She'd received offers to write books, appear on national talk shows, even start her own consulting firm. But her focus remained on the ground level, where real change happened one interaction at a time. As she prepared for another training session, Maya thought about that rainy night 6 months ago. One moment of injustice could have led to more division, more anger, more distrust. Instead, it had sparked a movement of understanding and growth that continued to expand. The last thing her grandmother had told her before passing away was, sometimes the best way to fight darkness is not with more darkness, but by teaching others how to create light. Looking at the positive changes spreading through her community and beyond, Maya knew she had done exactly that.